My name is Arleen Westerhof, and welcome to Economic Summit Conversations. This year, we're focusing on Africa because Africa is obviously the continent of the future. And today's topic is why religion matters. In a secular Europe, why do we need to actually start to take into account religion in our foreign policy and in our engagements with Africa? And today I'm going to be talking to, indeed, Dr. Simon Polinder, a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Utrecht. And Simon specializes in religion and international relations. So Simon, welcome. It's good to have you with us.
Thank you very much for the invitation. Looking forward to it.
Simon, the field that you're studying, it's so vast, it's so large. How did you get interested in this area?
Well, that's a fascinating story. I will keep it short. But when I was a lecturer at Utrecht, at Groningen University, I did a lot of courses. I taught a lot of courses: international politics, economics. We talked about culture, etc. But there was no course in the whole curriculum which addressed the role of religion. So after a while, I decided I have to fill the gap and to find out how's religion covered in all these theories of international relations, how important is it, and how can we possibly integrate it into a new framework to study the role of religion by taking seriously what we see in the field, the fact that 80% of the world is religious, and at the same time acknowledging the power of these theories that have been taught for centuries, for decades. So then I ended up at the Theology and Religious Studies Department in Groningen, and we did an interdisciplinary research on the role of religion in international relations and international relations theory. Mm-hmm. And I'm happily involved now in a project which relates to Africa, in which I'm more empirically involved, because I study the role of religious leaders in countering, addressing violent extremism and terrorism in Nigeria and Kenya.
Okay, so and that is huge.
That is huge, and it's worrisome, but of utmost relevance, because what happens in Africa has consequences for us. And if we can help with our knowledge and research, we should do it.
Yeah, that sounds wonderful, Simon. And we're going to be indeed digging into a certain aspect of what you're doing today, because a lot of our spending in the EU has gone towards Africa. And unfortunately, we have to conclude that it hasn't been as effective as many had hoped. And so today, I just want to talk to you about the role of religion, because that's something that we as a secular continent have failed to really take into account adequately. And for those of you watching, so that you know, Simon is one of the contributing authors to our book, which will be coming out this year, the first half of this year, called A European Africa Agenda, and just a guidebook to effective engagement in Africa. And Simon, one of the things that you said in your paper, because you have written a paper for that book, is you cite a Canadian researcher, at least she does research at McGill University in Canada, Barbara Bompari. And she said, failing to consider religion and religious ideas makes or risks the failure of enduring social change in Africa. Can you just explain a little bit about that to us and how you see that?
Yeah. There are a couple of reasons we should be very serious about Africa. And one very basic one is that you could say we are one family as humanity. So we have to take care of each other. And it's not only because Africa is on the rise, it's becoming more powerful, but just as a moral argument, you could say they're humans too, we are one family. But there is a more strategic consideration here too. The fact that Africa will grow immensely in the coming years in population, and at the same time, the fact that Africans in research say that they consider religion very important for their lives means that we can expect that the coming years there will be many religious Africans we have cooperation with, we have deals with, we have connections with. And not only on a human level, we should take seriously what they think, but also strategically. Because if you want to work together with people and you want it to be sustainable for a longer term, it does justice to people to take them seriously as a human being and also as a religious human being. And if you are able to connect on this deeper religious level, I think you can reach a better understanding on the topics you're working with, working together, and that makes it more effective, but also more sustainable.
Good point. Good point, Simon. Actually, in your paper, you made a comment that really surprised me, and that is Europeans are not as secular as we think we are.
Well, as you said it in the introduction, we have not taken religion seriously in our relationship with Africa. Well, on a certain level, there are many faith-based organizations that take that seriously, but that's not the mainstream. So in general, in politics, there is a kind of hesitation to take and to involve religion because, wow, we are not religious ourselves, and we have this distinction, separation between church and state. So we cannot that easily work together with religious actors. But that's not the only thing we have neglected. We've also, and we still do, neglect the fact that we are hugely shaped and by the Christian faith. And still, many people identify themselves when it comes to the question, who are you, as a Christian? And it's not that they would say, I consider it very important for my life and for all decisions that I make, but as an identity marker, they still consider it, well, in an overwhelmingly large percentage as the faith they identify with. So that shapes also how we look at the world. And being conscious of that can make you more, can make you humble on the one hand, because it's not religious versus secular or something like that. But it's also, it helps you to understand, well, we have deeper convictions too, like people in Africa. And that can create a deep connection together.
Okay. And so we have this framework that we're starting to move into. And that is indeed what you've associated, understanding that many people in Europe still identify with the Christian faith. That's changing fast, but still do. That can build a bridge, for example, between us and our relations with those in African nations. However, you're saying, involving religion is not enough. Just simply acknowledging that it plays a role is not enough. And in our preparation, we talked a little bit about worldviews and what are they, Simon, and how can they help us?
Yeah, well, even when I did my research on religion, I found out that it's a huge step already when people accept, okay, we have to take religion seriously as a factor or an actor. But that's just the first step, because it can also work like as if people consider religion the missing piece of the puzzle. So they just add one variable or one element. So now we're complete. We consider economic, social, and religious relations. But I think that religion is not comparable that way to economics, for example, because religion is, as I said, with the statistics about how relevant people in Africa consider religion for their life, they say, I consider it very important for my daily life. That means that they involve religion in all their day-to-day decisions. Mm-hmm. How to buy, how to live, how to die, how to marriage, how to what to dress, etc. So religion is in fact an all-pervading phenomenon. That's different from economics, although economics can be or turn into something like that. But in general, I think that's the difference. So it's not just if you approach Africans or the African continent or one of the countries that you say, okay, let's see if there's some religion. No, it's everywhere. So I think it would help that you add to the religious actor or factor the fact that there is the worldview element involved. And the advantage of this is also that it does more justice to the nuances and differences that are present, because then you can say, we have a worldview too. And a worldview in this the definition, I won't read an official definition, but it comes down to you have a fundamental way you look at the world. And it helps you to make sense of it, to understand it, and it also gives direction. And there is also some trust involved. So a worldview also means you are committed to this way of seeing the world. If you become aware of it, that you have your own worldview, it's much easier to accept that someone else also has a worldview. And this can be religiously inspired. It can be more secular, humanist, but that creates a level playing field, and it prevents a kind of, oh, here's the superior secular one, and here's the inferior, still believing worldview of people from the global south. So I think that would help if we add that concept to the discussion.
Yeah, you know, and I have to smile when you talk about here, you know, we've got the superior secular one and the inferior one that still believes and has faith. I think that's something that is really, really strong. Just being aware of the fact that we too have a worldview from which we operate. That allows us to see the other as an equal instead of ourselves as better or more advanced. You know, it's interesting, Simon, just as we're doing these conversations, I notice that for myself also too, a lot of my stereotypical views of Africa and its peoples are changing, and that's good. They need to change. But, you know, there'll be some watching also who are engaged with Africa. There are also going to be some watching who want to be engaged with Africa, and also policymakers. And we know that, you know, religion is always a bit of a thorny thing, you know, to try to be seen as not favoring one thing over the other. And so within Europe, at least, we've tried to ignore religion to kind of just say, you know, everything is the same, a level playing field. We've talked about the fact that that is not really an effective way to do it, because religion pervades everything that that religious people do. And Africa is very much a religious continent also too. But in your paper, you know, you talk about good religion and bad religion, because I'm thinking about, you know, policymakers. How are they supposed to handle that? Can you tell us what that difference between good and bad religion is, according to you, Simon?
Yeah, well, this is a dangerous area because just using bad and good is already very normative. But I have to be honest, our current research shows that people are continuously discriminating between good and bad religion. The religious leaders we interview in Nigeria and Kenya, they continuously say, well, violent extremism is not because of Islam or something else. It's a misunderstanding of religion. Or we should preach peaceful Islam because that's true Islam. So religious leaders themselves distinguish between them. But at a certain point, when you're in the field, you have to decide, am I going to work together with this faith-based organization or this religious leader?
Yeah.
And you better be conscious about the judgments you will be making, than saying, well, I'm neutral and I'm just involving. Well, you have to make judgments. And so you better be conscious and explicit about it. And I think it's possible to identify some ingredients that gives direction and helps you to discern, well, is this potentially good in reaching social transformation or a better society, or is there some danger involved? Okay. So that's why why I include this good and bad religion.
Yeah, because even though we don't speak it out, if I understand you correctly, we're continually making judgments. and weighing the factors. Is this good? Can I engage with this or not?
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah, and also, in your paper, another thing that I found really, really enlightening and also shocking too, so my stereotypes are falling, which is good, is that you cite that 50% of activities in the education field and healthcare in Africa are done by faith-based organizations.
Absolutely. So it's not even a choice you can make and say, well, we will sideline these FBOs. They are there. They're a very basic part of the infrastructure. So if you want to do something for the people in these countries, you have to do justice to the fact that these actors, these faith-based organizations are present, and you have to involve them. But then still, be cautious. There are very bad forms of religion, people misusing religion, like Boko Haram does in Nigeria. But we also have had this pastor in Kenya with this starvation cult. Well, that was religion. Be cautious. And well, there are certain ingredients like a dualistic worldview, for example. Do people think in very black and white categories, like a yin yang or an evil bad? Or can they also nuance and see that even the evil and the good are in their hearts, so they're involved in maybe evil wrongdoings too, so that they can take take seriously their own responsibility. Another one is, does it encourage you to be humble? Because if there's religion involved, there is a God involved, and if there's transcendence involved, it would make you humble because you don't have the overarching perspective on what's going on. So you have a limited perspective, and that makes you cautious, but also humble in your conclusions and in your deeds. Mm-hmm. So these are just two elements, but I think you can make a huge list with elements that indicate, okay, is this potentially good or going in the wrong direction?
Okay, that's very, very helpful. Simon, there are some ideas that you have as to how we can and should be, I would even say, engaging religion more constructively to work towards more lasting long-term effective solutions. Tell us about those.
Yeah, I think when you are working with religious actors on the ground, you have to be cautious that religion has this ambivalence. So it's not simply, okay, I will involve religion and it will be good. So always be cautious that religion has this ambivalence. But also, it's not always the case that religion will be of relevance, because you can also religionize everything and making religion too important, and then the real issue at stake becomes clouded. Yeah. Also, avoid instrumentalizing, because religious leaders or religious actors have their own goals. And if they become too much involved in politics or policy making, it can also kind of corrupt them in the eyes of the believers, because they are part of the powers of the politics, which might harm them in some way.
Okay, so I'm just going to jump in for a moment. The first thing you said was in the parties that we engage with, that we're engaging with, we have to try to help, and also ourselves to not to be too extreme one way or the other. Well, make it calling everything spiritual or not, denying that entirely. So it's kind of striking an appropriate balance. And the second thing that you said there is, can you repeat that again? Because I want to make sure that we get it, what you're saying. It's important.
The religionizing thing or the instrumentalizing?
Instrumentalizing. Because I'm afraid not everybody's going to know what instrumentalizing means.
Yeah, good point. Because that would mean that you just see religious actors as an instrument to reach your own goals. Sorry.
Okay. That's clear.
Yeah. While religious people, organizations, they have their own goals, which is very often oriented at the well-being of people, spiritual, etc., etc. So if you start to involve them, for example, we want to combat violent extremism, and you involve a religious leader. Well, at a certain moment, he might be involved in some investigations about one of his members in church or in the mosque. Well, how does he deal with it? If he wants to cooperate with the police because peace and security are important, and people start to know about it, they won't go to him or her anymore and share personal things, uh, have him involved in their households or marriages, etc. So that's also for religious leaders sometimes very difficult to balance. To what extent should I be involved in politics while I want to be truthful to my own believers? So that's the instrumentalizing thing. So you should respect the fact that at a certain point, religious leaders are are limited in what they can accomplish and how much they can be involved in policy making efforts.
All right. Well, that helps. And I think one of the things that we both know is just that also whether it's religious groups or social clubs, or in Dutch we call them verenigingen. That's a special form. I'm not so sure. I think we'll call them associations in English. But wherever you find people coming together, to accomplish something, whether it's sports or religion or whatever, those are areas of social capital. Those are areas where people have a certain relationship with each other. They trust each other to a certain degree. They can get things done together. And there's also cohesion. And we know that those things are important, actually, in trying to find effective solutions. I remember, Simon, I'm reading a book right now, and one of the co-authors, who comes from Africa, by the way, Nigeria, he was saying he left Nigeria because he got accepted into an American university, and he left with the intention of never going back. Now, one of the reasons why we're doing this focus on Africa is because it's such a hugely important continent, and as Economic Summit, we operate from a Judeo-Christian philosophical basis. That's how we operate. But one of the things that tells us is we've got to be involved with giving people hope. And part of that hope means to be able to, how do I put it? To give them hope in a better future for their nation, and to help them become actors in accomplishing that better future for their nations. So that hopefully will not only stem immigration a little bit. Why? Because I think it takes a lot of courage. People don't just wake up one morning and say, I'm going to leave behind everything and everyone I know and get into a rickety boat, just for the fun of it.
I joined a presentation 2 weeks ago about, it was organized by Open Doors and by the Humanist Association. It was about persecution. And there was a presentation by a Nigerian pastor who came from the area of Maiduguri, which is very much in the north of Nigeria and very much affected by Boko Haram. He is doing a PhD at the Free University. So he has a good life now. So he could stay here and have a good life. But he said, I want to go back as a pastor to take care of my people. Even though there is a huge potential that people would do harm to him or to his family. But he said, well, I have to be there, and maybe I can be of value with what I learned over here. So I was very much impressed because I saw that picture with his beautiful children and wife, and and he just goes back and tries to be a good shepherd, you could say, to the people he serves over there. And I think that his religious background helps him very much to do this, because, well, this really requires resilience and strength, and maybe also this hopeful perspective that change is possible.
Yeah.
So I fully agree.
And I like that. And I think that's probably where we're going to start to round off now, Simon, that gives a hopeful perspective. Simon, as you look at the continent of Africa, are you optimistic? Are you real pragmatic? Are you pessimistic? What do you see as an individual, not even as a researcher, but just as an individual?
Well, the first thing I learned is you better don't talk about Africa as one. Well, it is a continent, but there's so many differences, even between Nigeria and Kenya, the East and the West.
Yeah.
What I'm optimistic about the resilience of these people, and religion plays an enormous role in it. And I also see a lot of potential of sometimes. I read an article. Well, I'm saying this as a researcher. I'm sorry, but it inspired me personally too. Of a researcher that said it's not that we need more religion, but of another kind. And a month ago, I gave a presentation to development workers, and then a certain lady from Kenya told me, well, the problem sometimes here is that someone dies because of bad roads, and then people start to pray and say, God will help us. But they just have to fix the road.
Yeah.
So religion can also be this, make you passive.
Yeah.
And I would say that's sometimes the bad side of a certain kind of religion. And so I'm hopeful in the sense that there's a lot of potential because these people are so religious. But we should dare to talk about, okay, what kind of religion? And maybe we have to deepen it. We have to deepen the spirituality of us, ourselves, but also the people there, and don't take for granted, okay, it's religion, it's good.
Yeah. And you know what? I think that's a strong point that you make, Simon. That's a strong point. I think one of the things that I've taken away from this podcast today is that as those of us who are busy doing things in Africa, or even the EU, it's just as we start to engage with Africa, we can't get around engaging with religious groups, whether they're Christian or Muslim or Hindu or whatever. Because if 50% of healthcare and education, for example, are done by these groups, and we're going to have to deal with them. And so, yeah, the realization that we too have a mindset, and also some of the guidelines that you've given, it's just helping people, even last thing what you said, not be passive in religion, but take action for the good of others. And that kind of thing, I think those things will help us as we go forward. For those of you listening to the podcast, watching it, I just want to say to you, Simon is someone whose work I've started to follow, and following closely. Why? Because Africa is a continent that's developing, but they have some challenges, and extremism, for example, is also one of them. And so I think more than ever, it's really, really important that we know how to engage effectively and constructively with religious groups as we seek to work in Africa. Simon, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to be with us. And you just need to Google his name and you will find his papers and his contributions. Many of them are in English, and so they are able to be followed. And I think you're doing a great job. Simon, thank you very, very much.
Thank you too.